I would like to start by acknowledging the elders and traditional custodians of the unceded lands where we meet today, the traditional lands of the Bidjigal people, and recognise their continuous connection to culture, community and country. With our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and Indigenous students, scholars and significant thought leaders from the past and present as well. This is our final day of the talk series this week, so I welcome our in-person and online audiences. And we started on Monday and we've heard from over a dozen speakers on themes related to our next strategy, and all these talks will be also posted on our strategy website as well. Today we learn about how we are working towards restoring biodiversity in the Royal National Park with the reintroduction of platypuses after 50 years since their last sighting in the area. And we welcome Professor Richard Kingsford, Director of the UNSW Centre for Ecosystem Science, who has overseen the planning and preparation of this project. He has also made a lifetime contribution to the research of aquatic ecosystems and wetlands, and is well known for his work as project leader of Wild Deserts, which reintroduced 7 locally extinct mammals to Stewart National Park in the arid far northwestern corner of New South Wales. Then after, we will hear from Associate Professor Anne Kayis-Kumar, who is the founding director of the UNSW Tax and Business Advisory Clinic, an international award-winning platform for experiential work, integrated learning, innovative grassroots research and catalysing social impact across Australia. The Tax and Business Advisory Clinic supports people in serious hardship and in turn aggregates client data to identify systemic issues, and has presented her research team's findings of multiple parliamentary hearings, and is also regularly involved in the media and appearances on the ABC and Channel 10. But firstly, please welcome and join me in welcoming Professor Richard Kingsford.
Thanks very much, Pareen, and thanks for coming. I guess I'm going a bit more broad in terms of platypus and thinking about platypus across Australia rather than just in Royal, but that's an important part of it. So we've established the Platypus Conservation Initiative about 8 years ago, and we've been working on this for some time. I guess the context of why this sort of thing is important is, we have, if you like, the ecology of biodiversity, and we're in the Anthropocene, where there are major changes occurring across the world. And we tend to sort of think through the lens of these 6 major threats: pollution, habitat loss, invasive species, climate change, over-exploitation and disease. And really what we're interested in is making the impact in our research in terms of policy and management. So what I'm going to talk about is a little bit about platypus generally and their conservation status, then our achievements in terms of research, including reintroductions and the effects of dams, and then how we're engaging more broadly with society, and then a little bit on sort of future directions. I guess we started this project sort of thinking this is one of the most iconic animals, not only in Australia, but in the world. One of only 3 egg-laying mammals, and yet we don't know that much about it. So the first job was to get all the researchers who've been working on platypus together to come together and put together really a sort of what do we know about platypus across a whole range of different aspects. The green bits there are sort of the ecology, of which we didn't know that much. As a result of what we've been doing, we know a lot more, which is fantastic. But as most people in research know, the more you know, the less you know. And this is very true of what we're doing here. I guess there are quite a few warning signs in terms of their past and where they live. So we're talking about the grey bit there is their potential distribution. You can see there that of these catchments, only 230, 37% no platypus records in the last 10 years. and 7 to 8% of those catchments, nothing in the last 25 years. So that resulted in a paper that we wrote about shifting baselines. And what we did was take a sort of different approach and look through Trove at history and in terms of platypus. Once we'd got rid of the 20,000 mentions of HMAS platypus, we started to hone in on what was the real focus, which is what these animals are doing. And intriguing sort of commentaries about bigger numbers than we ever imagined or have seen around. Being able to shoot 16 or 18 platypus in a river when we have very seldom seen more than 2 or 3. So that got us thinking about this big challenge of shifting baselines. Currently, the species is near threatened. It's known to be decreasing somewhere between 30,000 and 300,000 individuals. Big problem was the fur trade. We think we're still dealing with that. So this is a blanket made of 40 platypus furs. And they were hunted extensively. If you want to get a platypus coat, fur coat, that was also around. For the 20th century, one man shot many thousands of platypus over his career. But you can see there the fur trade for platypus in the Sydney markets was in the thousands at the turn of the century. And huge impact, we think, that we're still seeing today. And so these are some of the numbers that we picked up through our historical analysis. Again, as I said, nothing like that sort of number that we are aware of today in any of the rivers that we've been studying. And then there's a whole range of threats that we have been working on. One of the problems with platypus is that everything affects them. So where all the large dams are, the red spots, are right across the distribution of platypus. We know that with land clearing, rivers build sediment up. We know that some of them get caught up in fishing line. Fire effects at the 2019, 2020 fires were devastating for platypus because of the sediment that went in. Increasing droughts that are also exacerbated by taking too much water out of rivers. We know that foxes will hunt platypus. We get this sort of bizarre yabby traps that catch platypus and then they drown. And we know that where they have their holes and nests in burrows, they're eroding in different places and pollution. So the full gamut of problems affect platypus. This is what we do day in, day out when we're working with platypus. We put out these nets at 4 to 7 a.m. And also a net across the river. And then somewhere between 6 p.m. and 1 a.m., more than 1 a.m., we catch our platypus. We've caught nearly 500 platypus in the work that we've been doing and in some sometimes pretty horrendous conditions like -7 degrees in around Thredbo. What we know about the life history is a lot more as a result of our project. We actually anaesthetize our platypus so that we're able to take samples without inflicting any distress on them. And then we take blood from them. The easiest place is actually from the bill, but again, as they're anaesthetized. And we're looking about, differences between platypus populations. We're also looking at food resources that we can get from their body tissues and look at isotope analysis. And obviously we're checking on their health and stress levels. And some of them do have quite, you may not be able to see, but there are a lot of ticks around one of these feet. So there's some challenges there. I guess a big development we've worked on is tracking their movements. And they're very difficult animals to work on anyway because they're nocturnal and also they're underwater. But what we've developed is this methodology where we put very tiny acoustic tags into them through surgery, and then these are listening stations up and down a river where they essentially ping every time an individual goes past them. And what we find with these movement patterns is they're quite different. Some of them tend to occupy particular river positions on the y-axis there over a number of weeks. And then we do get some individuals that will go a lot further, but, you know, cumulatively, so they maximum they probably goes about 20 kilometres up a river. And then over a whole year, you can get some idea of how those movements vary. They tend to vary a bit more in the spring when there's a lot of mating occurring. We have a story about what happens. We've investigated platypus populations above and below dams, and essentially looking at some genetic markers, found that the generations after dam building, you get more and more difference between the platypus. So essentially they're becoming separated, and that becomes more of a problem if you've got fewer platypus below dams. And so we're seeing this slow extinction from Murray-Darling Basin rivers, which are west of the Great Divide, as a result of that. But I guess, you know, the exciting thing is we've been in the space of platypus reintroductions. The first one we did was actually a rescue from Tidbinbilla Nature Reserve in Canberra, where they had some very grim, and you can see how dry it got, that they panicked in terms of their platypus. So we actually worked with Taronga Zoo and went down there. They then got held at Taronga for more than a year, and then we released them back into the wild, and most of them were okay. Some we lost the trackers on. And then, as Perrine was mentioning, the most recent one are the Interroyal, which is obviously just south of Sydney here, which is very exciting. These had been extinct in Royal for more than 50 years. And even though this is a sort of iconic picture of Royal, it has a few rivers in there, the Hacking River and the Kangaroo Creek system. Not extensive, but platypus were there. And so last year we introduced 10 individuals, 6 females and 4 males. And we've been tracking those over time, and really excitingly, we got a juvenile this year in Royal when we went out there to show that they are actually breeding. So the longer term plan is to have them supplemented with more platypus so that we establish a self-sustaining breeding population. So in terms of the sort of ecological and social impact, obviously this is one of these mega charismatic animals. It's a species that's in trouble, big biodiversity challenge because of all of the things that can go wrong with it. And we are getting, so this is one of the young traditional owners letting go of one of the platypus in Royal. This is Minister Penny Sharp letting go another platypus. So there's a lot of interest in what's going on in this project. We can't do this without lots of help. So, you know, our major partners like Taronga and national parks, but also and WWF. So we spend a lot of time working with all these different partners, particularly in terms of identifying opportunities for funding, but also doing some really interesting research. In terms of outreach, we've managed to get very wide media coverage, which has been fantastic. The estimates are that we reach 30 million people in over a year through various TV and radio. I don't go into Instagram, but Tanil tells me that we've had 115 million views of, I think it's a platypus making a funny noise. And there's actually a Netflix documentary coming out next year on the work that we do. So in terms of the future, I guess, you know, what we're trying to do is establish ongoing partnerships that can sustain this research. So we actually have a joint position with Taronga at the moment, and we are working with Taronga in this state-of-the-art platypus rescue facility, which is at Dubbo Western Plains Zoo, and it has a capacity to take up to 60 platypus. And the value of that, both as a research facility, but also being able to, in the next drought, be able to rescue platypus from different rivers and then put them back there is what it's aimed at doing. But it's also experimental opportunities. So these are the ponds for platypus that are across that middle part. But they're also more friendly platypus areas where hopefully they're going to breed in the next year or so. So that's part of reintroduction and bringing them back into this space. So I guess just to summarize, there's multiple threats to these animals, which we can't deal with all of those. And so, this is somebody who's killed platypus as well as turtles in the Hunter. We've got great opportunities in terms of increasing this knowledge and what people think of it. We're engaged in citizen science programs as well, and a lot of outreach. And so there's further opportunities in terms of increasing input into management, and particularly environmental flows, that provide us perhaps with a future opportunity to do more in this space. So I think that's me done. Thank you. Might stay up here.
Have some time for some Q&A.
You didn't even wave at me, so I mustn't have been anywhere near 20 minutes.
Thanks for the talk. I have a question that maybe my assumption is wrong, but I was wondering, why are platypuses so genetically similar between the mainland and Tasmania, given that the river system's unconnected, and especially Tasmania?
Yeah.
Or is it that,
That's a difficult question. I'm not sure I know the answer to that. I do know that there do seem to be some genetic differences between Tasmania, and then there's a southern mainland population and a northern mainland population, but they are the same species. They get much larger as you go down through the latitudinal gradient. So the biggest platypus are in Tasmania. And that's a thing that happens with mammals as they go to colder areas. They tend to get larger. I guess one of the things and we have been doing genetic testing and not finding any difference or variation in these populations, but these rivers have been separated for a long time. But we do know that platypus will move between rivers, and they probably do that up in the catchments. So up high where the rivers first start as springs, and we know in Tasmania they certainly walk over land quite a bit. So that might be another mechanism where you're getting sort of interaction between populations turning up in the genetics. But it is a bit of a intriguing question.
Thank you.
Thanks for the talk, Richard. I'm really interested to hear a little bit more about the citizen science projects that you mentioned.
We have a project with Australian Conservation Foundation where it's called the Platy Project. And essentially it's saying to people, if you see a platypus or take a picture of it, load it up. Because what we want to do is fill in those catchments where there aren't any platypus, or at least know where there are platypus that, they might be there, but they haven't been sighted for a while. It actually has contributed quite a bit to new sightings. So we are getting new data and engaging with both the conservation organisations, but also some of the citizens out there. But it's difficult because I don't know, how many of you have seen platypus? Oh, cool. So they're not that easy to see.
Only on the Instagram.
So you sort of got to go out at the right time, and but when you go on dusk, you can, in the right place, you can certainly see them. So that's what we're trying to educate people about, and hopefully when they get into that, we start to think about platypus conservation. I guess ultimately I'd like to see platypus as like a river flagship species that if you've got platypus and they're doing well, then you're in good shape. Thank you. Great, thank you.
Okay, so now I'd like to welcome Associate Professor Anne Kayis-Kumar to the stage, who is the founding director of the UNSW Tax and Business Advisory Clinic. And her work was actually submitted to our team earlier in the year, and we wrote an article about the clinic and its work it's doing with vulnerable people and providing tax and accounting advice. So, yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Come on up.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me and for all the support that your team has given us as well. It means so much. And we've got a really nice sized group today. So please feel free. I certainly don't want to just present for the whole thing without you feeling that you can just jump in. So please just shout out, jump in. If you'd like me to focus on anything in particular, if you've got any questions as we go, I'm not going to be nearly as exciting as platypuses. Obviously, it's tax, right? So bear with me, please. But that's part of it, right? We need to shift the dial on how our community thinks about tax and how tax at the moment is a bit of a dirty word. That tax justice is actually social justice. And we're seeing that. Let me give you an example. Just this week alone, we've received inquiries from 3 separate clients, 1 from a domestic violence service and 2 from ministers' offices, because people are lost, they're stuck. These 3 people in particular, we've got other issues too, but these 3 people have received a letter from the ATO called a director penalty notice. A director penalty notice gives you 21 days to pay the full amount of your corporate tax liability or face personal bankruptcy. Add then a layer of financial abuse and domestic violence. We're getting clients who are in tears because they didn't even know that that company existed, let alone that they're the director of the company, and that in less than 21 days they're going to be made bankrupt because there is no way that they're going to get access to $180,000. Let's then take that to the next step. If they don't get professional advice to help solve that, to mount a successful defense against that, then the next step is bankruptcy. And bankruptcy obviously has serious consequences, not just financially, but in terms of mental health, ability to get finance, your interest rate, your ability to travel overseas, your ability to start up a fresh business. And then the third order effect is if you're made bankrupt and you go into family court after a relationship breakdown, that can affect your standing, which can mean that you can lose access from a child custody perspective. So who would have thought tax would have anything to do with any of this? But what we're seeing, and I've termed it piggybacking off the sexually transmitted deaths that you may have heard about in the media, sexually transmitted tax debts is the piece that my team is helping with. And to their credit, the media put this as part of the ABC's The Business, which then got traction with federal government. We recently had a cross-office meeting with 5 ministerial offices, including the Prime Minister's office and the Attorney General's office. So I've been pinching myself for the last few months. And that has been since brought to the attention of the ATO, who are now looking at what they can do from an administrative process perspective. But the problem still remains. We got 3 DPN clients this week alone, and they issue tens of thousands of DPNs. So how can we make sure this doesn't happen? Because not everyone who has this problem knows to contact us, and we only get a very modest amount of funding, so we can't help everyone who needs it. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Because that was a very long prelude. Okay, so to give you a bit of an example of the team, this is the team. Every start of term, because it's a will course that this is as well, the clinic operates a will course every term. And as of this summer, including over the summer. So I'm really excited that we're getting a bit more momentum, a bit more interest from students. Because when we first started this Will course, we had 2 students enroll. And I'm going to put you on the spot here, but Paul, thank you so much, because in terms of how to get this thing started, it really is a collaboration from a myriad of both internal and external stakeholders who, if you want to set an equivalent of this up in your own discipline, and by helping people in the community bridge the gap between the casework in community piece and the research and advocacy piece, that for me, I think, has been the reason why we've been getting so much traction, is because we are in the community, we've got a frontline team. And then I look at the back-end data and try to identify where there's above normal rates of things. And that's why the domestic violence piece came up. Because year on year, since we've started, it's been over 60% of our female clients have self-reported domestic violence. Over 60, and in the last 18 months, it's been over 80% of our female clients self-reporting domestic violence and financial abuse. And of course, they are a very specific cohort of people in severe distress, severe financial distress, and there is an association between financial distress and financial abuse. So it makes sense that it would be above general levels, but that seems way too high. And so we bring in, as part of our regular process when we onboard students, an element of a full-day induction that includes mental health first aid in a nutshell. And so big shout out to Madhav and his team, because they run that for us every term. And also we bring in the Financial Abuse Service New South Wales team, who give us financial abuse training, awareness training. And so that's Jasmine, who's the head of policy, and Rebecca here, who give us not just their time, but also their insights when it comes to advocacy, because we partner with them for the advocacy piece. So we're a modest-sized team, mostly because of our budget. It's very modest. We have 4 registered tax agents who give us 1 day a week of every week of their year. They've got hearts of gold because they've got their own practice, and the issues that they help us with are so much heavier than what they would get in practice, and we only give them the same rate as a sessional because they're supervising our students. And we have 1 full-timer. So we don't even have 2 FTE. But what we lack in size, we make up for with our passion. Everyone there is genuinely interested in helping the people who are most in need in our community. And that feeds into how we operate. So we're very much a referrals-heavy team. The moment you say we're giving free tax advice, you can imagine we don't want walk-ins just to come in without any triage, and we don't have the funding to triage because you need to pay someone to do that. So we use the proxy of trusted community partners, and that works really well because then we can close the loop with them and collaborate with them in other ways. Does anybody have any questions or want me to talk about something different so far? So far, so good? And I thought I'd just sort of stop talking in my words and put some words on the screen that reflect the clients that we help. And what we do is really anchored in reducing inequalities. If we're going to pick an SDG, it would be about reducing inequalities, because we're helping the people who are in the most severe distress. And I'll give you a moment because you'll read this quicker than I can read it out aloud. So when it comes to the spectrum of, prevention, early intervention, crisis, recovery, we're definitely at the crisis point. And then once the crisis is resolved, ideally we can support the recovery piece, the healing piece. And the second quote just makes me smile, because the fact that someone who previously had, relatively lower levels of tax literacy now actually wants to be empowered and come to the dark side and enjoy accounting and tax along with us. And so the fact that that is the reaction, the sense of relief and the sense of empowerment that we're getting from the clients that we serve. For me and for the team, that really does make it. That's why we're doing this. It's to be able to help people who need it the most. And to give you an example, an idea of what that cohort looks like, since inception, our data has been like this. So there's a lot of numbers, so bear with me here. Overrepresentation of victim survivors of domestic violence, as we've already talked about. The other two elements that keep coming up year on year are really high levels of severe mental illness. And we're working with the Black Dog Institute on that piece. And again, the mental health literature is known that financial distress and mental health problems go hand in hand, but the tax literature had no idea. So for people in my little bubble, that was just one of those moments where you go, wow, okay, but it's obvious for someone who's in that other space. So it's about breaking down silos and bringing that then to the attention of policymakers and administrators so that the ATO is aware. And that's a really critical piece, because to give you some context of how the ATO operates, if you don't respond to the ATO, they'll try again. And if you don't respond again, they'll escalate the type of letter that they give you, and they'll take your non-communication as deliberate non-compliance. But there might be other reasons for not responding. And if you look at the financial well-being literature, they've got this great graph that I don't think I've included in these slides that's called the financial vulnerability iceberg illusion. And one of the obvious visible indicators of financial vulnerability is non-communication, late payments, and those sorts of things. So that literature hasn't fed its way through to ATO practice and procedure, which still currently conflates that behaviour for deliberate non-compliance. And then the cascade effect of that is then the full force of the law will be applied to that client because they're deliberately non-compliant. That's highly problematic, as I'm sure you all agree, particularly in those cases where you've got things like sexually transmitted tax debts. Micro business is also the other theme that keeps coming up. People who are sole traders, maybe they've been told by someone who they trust, get an ABN. You can claim GST credits and whatever else, get an ABN. But once you're an ABN, the ATO sees you as a small business, and you have a whole other level of compliance obligations. And interestingly enough, amongst our clients, we'll always ask them, are you a small business? And then later on, we'll ask them, do you have an ABN? Guess what number will say no to small business, but yes to ABN? Thank goodness it's not that. That would be 20%, roughly 20%, which I thought was pretty high, because it's 1 in every 5 small business doesn't know that they're a small business in this cohort. And the ATO assumes they know and expects them to submit a quarterly BAS. And if you don't submit your quarterly BAS, you have to pay penalties. So you can see how very quickly the liability amount will increase, because you pay penalties, you pay interest. The interest rate is 11% on unpaid tax liabilities. So that's a bit of a flavour for how we operate and how we interact with government policymakers and administrators, but also with the community. I'm very happy to share anything that you think would be useful. And I might just, again, put a spotlight on a client matter. DPNs are something that we're finding is, if you think in quadrants like I do, the urgent and important quadrant, the DPNs are really high on that list, because 21 days, otherwise bankruptcy, when these people don't even have assets. So there's no point bankrupting them. It just adds to the distress that they're already experiencing. But this is an example of a DPN-specific scenario. And you really need a professional. You can't just send an email and hope that it will work. Part of the problem is the law and the way it's been interpreted. DPNs, you can defend yourself against a DPN if you have some other good illness or some other good reason. But domestic violence is not some other good reason. So we're working to hopefully turn the dial on that one a little bit. But again, this is one of our clients who came to us in tears with a DPN of $175,000. She's escaped a domestic violence situation, mother of 3 from regional New South Wales, and clearly this is not the right target of a DPN, but she received one. So the sense of relief that people get when they have a professional who is in their corner is a really strong theme. This is the very shameful self-promotion slide in terms of what we've done and how we've put a spotlight on this issue. I'm so grateful that it has been picked up, but I've already talked about it before, so I won't spend too much time on it, only to say a huge thank you to again, goes back to the piece around the university has so much expertise in it, and relying on people and cross-referencing ideas with people I found really useful, and who I relied on when it comes to media has been our media team. So a shout out to the media team, because they're the ones that pitched this to the ABC, and that's how it took off. We had the paper sitting for 6 months. It was just sitting there. So that piece around, working with the amazing brains trust that is the university and all the different people around it. A huge shout out as well to Jan Brackenridge, who's the co-convener of the Gendered Violence Research Network, and I've been working with her, collaborating since 2020. And that really helps so much when it comes to contextualizing where your piece is compared to a bigger picture where it's not really, I don't really feel like we're in my lane when it comes to tax to be diving into the domestic violence piece, for example. But the support and the collegiality has just been phenomenal. So I hope if you're thinking you're doing something like this, I hope you do it. And if there's anything that I can help with or any questions that you have that you think would be useful to ask, then please do. Thank you so much for your time and for being here today. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for the talk. Really interesting. I'm just interested in, you mentioned the supporting clients through that healing stage, and I guess almost the if and when they manage to move through that stage or move past it. Have you seen any clients as of yet kind of taking on that advocacy role or taking on that kind of organizing and doing that campaign work themselves? Because I think the work that you're doing is great and is so important. And if we can, channel in that energy back into system change that could be really exciting as well.
Yeah, that would be phenomenal. And I'm really glad you asked that, because that's one of the questions that we've been grappling with, particularly when it comes to media, because you want a human case study where that person is the advocate. And at the moment, all of the clients that we're helping, they're still in such a challenging situation. They're not yet at the survivor advocate level, but a couple of them have indicated that once the dust has settled on their family court proceedings, which apparently can take 4 years to get through, which is a whole other issue, then they'd be keen to come back to us. But, we've got clients who, one is a medical professional, so highly educated, has 2 children in transitional housing because of this, wants to talk about it, but is worried that her being in the media is going to mean that, her 2 children and all their friends will see it all. So it's so important to have survivor advocate voices and for lived experience to be at the table. I absolutely agree with you. And that's one thing that we're hoping we will get to eventually. But for now, I think because we are so green, we've only been around for 5-6 years. Hopefully in the future that would be amazing. And to have something like a lived experience panel, I know that CWES, who's one of our partner orgs, they have a lived experience panel, and that is just beautiful, because then you have that community there who can really advocate, and by sharing their stories, I agree, it's so compelling, because I love the data, I love the numbers, but the human stories that's really where it is. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. This is so interesting. I know that this week a book has been released around the robo-debt and the deaths that have been associated with that, and actually all of the kind of institutional failings and gaps that led to such literal deaths and human collateral in that process. So tax and letters from government and the threat or fear of financial distress is so large and so profound in so many people's lives. What I'm curious about is, I don't understand how your doors aren't just, it doesn't have the line of the hundreds of people every day. How do you manage with the flux of people? Obviously referrals, but I have had 2 or 3 people quite consistently come up to me and say, hey, I'm going to the tax clinic. Can you tell me how to get there just around campus? So I'm like, people are coming. People do come to the door. How do you manage that?
And we have I feel really bad. This isn't being recorded, is it? We have a sign on the door that says that we don't take staff and students. So I feel really bad that people go anticipating they'll get some advice. Something that we want to make sure that we're doing is, because we're so small, is only targeting the most desperately in need. But another pillar that I haven't talked about is education. So we do in-community education. A couple of weeks ago, we were at Marrickville helping refugee women, and we had translators come in. That we are also, shameless plug, I think it's the 1st of November, and I think it's a founders thing. Yes, we'll be, we'll have someone come in to help with the tax and business literacy piece. So we do pockets of that, but in terms of bread and butter core work, I would love to do more of that. Yeah, but at the moment, it's just a matter of, like you're saying, how do you juggle those needs and those demands? And we have really good links with financial counsellors, community legal centres, domestic violence services, and they are our primary channel to getting clients. And because they've already done the triage for us, we know we can pretty much just accept them. And we've had to modify, actually, like you said, because of the volume of inquiries, we've had to modify our criteria for our non-referral clients. Yeah, and it's not easy, because I was just talking to the team earlier today, and now with those 3 DPN matters, then you've got to act, right? Within 21 days, you need to have a positive response from the ATO. So that then adds another burden on the team. So I would really like, if anyone's listening, some more funding. I think that's the problem. It's that we ran a survey of the financial counselling sector pre-COVID, and it was 37% of people who see a financial counsellor have an unmet tax and accounting need. So we're talking about 80,000 people across the country every year, at least, and that's a very conservative estimate. So we need this national program to get much bigger, so it's comparable to a community legal centre infrastructure. So very much looking to the model that the law profession, the legal profession has, and hope that over time we can have something at that sort of scale.
That would be amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Anne. Thanks for your talk. I guess a follow-up question, call to action. How do we help you grow, get more funding? Like, what's the plan?
Oh, thank you. That is so kind. I mean, again, going back to the piece around how much support the uni's already given us. So, the faculty give the support, the school does too. I'm working with philanthropy and, applying for any research grants that seem appropriate and philanthropic grants that seem appropriate. But if you've got any ideas for what I can do better, I would love to have a tic-tac and, I don't know whether it's, a donation drive, or I've got no idea, but we do have a piece now where all of the frontline team are beyond capacity, not at capacity. It's a point now where it's getting a little stressful. Yeah, because the other clinics, it's a nationwide program with 15 clinics nationwide, and it's going to grow to 20 next year. But every clinic has different availability. And for New South Wales, there's only 3 statewide. Yeah, so we're feeling the pinch. It'd be great to problem solve. Yes.
Last questions. All right, well,
Oh, I think Paul.
Thank you. Dan, it's so exciting to hear the clinic is still thriving after all these years.
Thank you.
I remember when we first, not me, when I helped you all those years ago, one of the things we did was partner with one of the big accounting firms. I can't remember which one it was. Is that still going? And if not, is there any opportunity, I guess, to revive that with one of the other big accounting firms?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we did get a lot of interest from the Big Four when we first started. And like you said, one of them was, willing to help. The challenge with the Big Four accounting firms is that they only have a registered tax agent at partner level. And the partners are less available than the juniors, but the juniors can't actually lodge the tax returns. And in our case, what we really need is a registered tax agent to make the lodgements. To give you an example, just this week we got a client come in with 63 BAS. And one of our team members, heart of gold, was like, yep, I'll take that client. That's fine. So you need someone who will help train and supervise students, but when push comes to shove, you've got to have someone who can actually lodge that many returns and has the technical background, but also the access to the tax agent portal, which gives you a lot of data that you can't get off MyGov. So then we've pivoted. And right now what we do is we're utilising the generous pro bono support of Johnson Winter Slattery. And they're helping us with crafting the DPN letters. So the wonderful team there, we've got a tax partner and her senior associate who are helping with that piece, but we haven't yet cracked the registered tax agent conundrum. Yeah, so would love to tic-tac about that as well.
Sure, I'm happy to help.
Thank you.
Please join me in thanking.
Thank you so much.